All right, everyone, welcome back. We're going to go through the same process now of linking a change to aggregate supply to each of the three economic goals. So the process here is still 3 steps, but what you do in each is different. And I want you just to think now and make a prediction. Okay, we're not going to use the aggregate demand formula to explain how a change to aggregate supply changes the goals, obviously. Make a prediction on what we will use instead, just in your mind. And I hope you said um, ability and willingness. Okay, so this is the equivalent of what we use to link to the 3 economic goals. It's that middle one, which is very, very different. Okay, and you've got to be really careful when you read the question about which side you're going to go down to argue the change, whether it's aggregate demand or aggregate supply. There will only be one correct answer. There'll be something in the question to tell you whether it's an aggregate demand or aggregate supply question. It will either be the factor will only apply to aggregate demand or aggregate supply, or there are a few that cross over with both, and so the question then will be very specific and it will say something like on the aggregate supply side of the economy. And obviously then you're going to talk about ability and willingness. So let's go down to what this actually means. Okay, so ability to supply is about productive capacity. Yeah, remember we've used that phrase before. So like if I use my glass of water here as an example, okay, so the capacity of this glass of water is all the way to the top here. Yeah, that's the capacity, that's the full amount that can fit in the glass. And you'll see there's a bit here that doesn't have any water in it. So you would say my glass has some spare capacity. Now, what ability does is the ability to supply will either make, in this example, my glass bigger so I can fit more into it, or the glass itself will get smaller, as in I just physically can't fit as much into it. And it's a similar concept with the economy. Yeah, things that change the ability to supply will change the productive capacity or the full amount of production that is possible within an economy. Think of this to an expansion of the production possibility frontier, for example. So when we can make more stuff, that's going to increase our productive capacity and our ability to supply, and vice versa. Now go across to willingness. What's willingness all about? Well, it's all about cost of production here. Okay, anything that changes the cost of production will change the willingness to supply. And obviously an increase to the cost of production will result in a decrease in the willingness to supply because there's less profit to be made. Okay, so now just like we did with aggregate demand, we're going to go through, well, what are the reasons that those 3 particular goals change? Well, okay, if ability or willingness to supply, and we're just going to use increases as an example. Okay, so if either ability or willingness increases, well, prices will go down, okay, because suppliers will pass on the cost savings in the form of lower prices. Okay, so if ability or willingness to supply increases, more profit is made, and so they can afford to decrease their prices. If willingness or ability to supply increases, well, the reason why GDP goes up is there's increased production levels. Yeah, so with ability, the glass itself is getting bigger, the economy itself can make more stuff, therefore they do. And so when we make more stuff, GDP goes up because production levels increase. And then the link to employment, again, you've got to piggyback off the back of GDP. So if we're making more stuff, well, then we're going to increase the level of employment in the economy. And it's the same kind of little line, yeah, because there's an increase in the derived demand for labor. If we're making more stuff, we need more people to make that stuff. So very similar ideas here. And feel free to flick back and forth in this video when you're answering your practice questions. Okay, so whoops, this didn't really work. There we go. Okay, so the process here is very similar. I've just circled the differences. Yeah, so the process for how you answer an aggregate demand question through to an economic goal is exactly the same here for aggregate supply, but in that first one, you just go to the aggregate supply factor instead of the aggregate demand. And for the second one, you're not going to link through to a change in the aggregate demand formula, you're going to link through to a change in ability or willingness. And can I make a recommendation? Don't do both. Yeah, if the factor changes the productive capacity of the economy, then it's ability. If the factor changes the level of profit that is made, then it's going to be willingness. Just go the one that makes the most sense to that particular factor. And then the third process is the same. Yeah? How does that affect the goal? And then why? So let's go through an example together. Explain the effect the discovery of a new coal mine in Western Australia will have on the level of economic growth, GDP. Same thing. All right, so what do we do first? Well, we've got to think of what is the aggregate supply factor here? Well, this one here is going to be the quantity of factors of production. Yeah, we've got more coal now, and so that's going to increase the ability to supply. Okay, that's going to create more profit because there's obviously more stuff that's being made, and so more profit being generated. Yeah, because the productive capacity has increased. We can now make more stuff because we've found more stuff to make stuff from. Please don't write stuff in your answers. And that's obviously whenever ability or willingness to supply increases, then boom, you get straight an increase to aggregate supply. And then we got a link through now to economic growth. Okay, well, since there's an increase in productive capacity, we're making more stuff. And that's an increase to GDP driven by an increase in production levels. All right, let's go again. Explain. There's no E on that, but you can kind of figure it out. Explain the effect a decrease to the company tax rate will have on price levels in an economy. Remember at the start how I said there's often clues in the question as to whether it's going to be aggregate demand or aggregate supply? Well, your clue here is the word company tax rate. All right, so that should be a little flag to go, whoop, okay, we're going to go down the aggregate supply line here. So first one, is company tax rate in the study design? No, it's not. So your first mark is going to be linking through to an aggregate supply factor that is. And in this case, it's going to be cost of production. Yeah, so if we're decreasing the company tax rate, then that means there's going to be a decrease in the cost of production. What's that going to do? Well, that's going to increase the willingness to supply because there's more profit to be made. There's less money being spent on taxes. That's your reason. Now, you've got to put these reasons in, guys. And then your final one, well, what does that do to AS? Well, it increases. Now, all we've got to do is link through to price levels, which is the level of inflation. Okay, well, if aggregate supply is going up, we're going to have a fall in average price levels due to producers passing on the cost savings in the form of lower prices. Remember, suppliers pay cost, consumers pay price. I'll say that again. Suppliers pay the cost, consumers pay the price. And so as a result, you've got to get these words right in your answers. You can't muck them up, okay? All right, your turn. So on the supply side of the economy, explain the effect a lower number of university graduates will have on the level of unemployment. Sorry, the level of employment. All right, now there's going to be a clue in this question that tells you that it's aggregate supply. If you were writing this, you would circle it and then you would put AS as your clue. So the process is there on the left-hand side. Pause the video now and just do the links in the chain. And then when you're done, come back. All right, so here we go. Define the relevant aggregate supply factor. Well, lower number of university graduates. Okay, well, there's still the same number of people. So it's not the quantity of factors of production, but it is the quality of factors of production, because if there's less uni graduates, then there's a lower quality of labor coming into the labor force. All right, so you get a mark just for linking it through to that aggregate supply factor and the direction. Your second mark is ability and willingness. Well, here there's a fall in the willingness to supply, okay, because there's less profit to be made. I've got a little note on this one. You could also do ability for this question, because you could argue, well, if less people are going to university, then less discoveries and stuff will be made. So yes, you could talk about that, but I think this one's all about willingness, because if you've got less skilled people coming into the labor force, they're going to take longer to do things. Yeah. So there's less available quality of labor resources, making quality graduates more expensive. So there's a number of different ways you could argue here. But you've got to get to, if you're going to talk willingness, less profit being made. And then finally, effect on the goal in question. Well, this is going to be a decrease in GDP, and you can draw the little chart, yeah, if that helps, to see what happens to GDP. So let's quickly do that. I'm not sure whether this is going to go around the right way or wrong way for you. But if you've got your chart here, see that? You've got your aggregate supply line and your aggregate demand. Yep, that's really reflective, but you can kind of get what I'm saying. And then what are we seeing here? We're seeing a fall in the aggregate supply. And you can see here then price are going to go up and real GDP is going to go down. So you can do a little bit of a test, yeah, on the little margin of your paper if you're not really sure, because they will give you the answer, but it's going to have a decrease in GDP and a fall in employment levels due to a lower derived demand for labour. Okay, all right, and I think that's it for examples. So now, if you're unsure about any of those concepts, go back over the video, and then I think there's an instruction in sector on doing a few of those as full responses. But the beauty of the video is you can go back and forth, and if you have any questions, you know where I am at home. So feel free to send me a message. Thanks, guys.